Welcome to another episode of Ask Anthony. Here we are, Tuesday, April 23rd, 2019. First of all, I want to wish a happy 30th birthday to one of my key executives and dear friends, Kayla Smith. I won't tell you how old she is, but happy birthday, Kayla. So, Anthony Peluso here from Wealth for Life, CEO, founder, and Australian property expert. Today we're going to talk about that question that we get asked, and I'm sure you all have on your mind, which is where to buy. Where do I invest? Where do I put my money when it comes to buying real estate? Now, there's a couple of, I'll give you the simple answer first, right? The simple answer is if you're looking to buy I'll tell you where not to buy real estate, by the way, okay? Don't buy real estate in any other state of Australia other than Melbourne and Sydney, okay? Now, you're going to get commentators and economists that tell you otherwise. Most of that is based on impulse conclusions that they come to. But when I talk about real estate, I talk about investing. And when I talk about investing, I'm looking for something that has 15 to 20 years of demonstrable results, okay? So if you want to be able to predict the future, one of the best ways to predict the future is to have a look at what happened in the past, okay? So if you look at the Australian property market, and when they talk about the Australian property market at a very high macro level, they're really only talking about Melbourne and Sydney, okay? Yes, you can make a little bit of money in Hobart. Hobart's skyrocketing right now, and Perth did so well with the mining boom many years ago. But the reality is those things, if you look at their track record over a long period of time, they've done very little, okay? And there are reasons behind that. So if you're looking to make serious money long-term in real estate, and be a traditional investor as opposed to a speculator, okay? Because if you're a speculator, you can jump into those other cities, but you need to know what you're doing because you need to be able to pick the bottom and the top of the market, all right? And I'll tell you what, I don't know too many people that can actually do that, okay? So if you're looking to buy real estate and invest long-term, stick to Melbourne and Sydney as a general rule. That's where you're going to make your money. Here are the reasons why. Number one, employment, okay? There's macro level, there's macro factors and micro factors that dictate this, right? So if you look at the greatest density of employment, it's all based around the eastern seaboard, right? Predominantly Melbourne and Sydney. Just look at the, the multinationals, the top 200 companies in Australia. Most of their head offices are either based in Melbourne or Sydney. So the greatest amount of employment opportunities will always be in areas like Melbourne and Sydney, okay? If you have a look at our infrastructure, that kind of indicates that, okay? So where there's employment opportunities, that's where the population migrates to, okay? People move for work, okay? Being such an important part of our lives, people will uproot their existing cities, their existing environment, change environments purely for work, okay? So if you've got employment, the greatest employment opportunities in areas like Melbourne and Sydney, because that's where a majority of the big corporations have their head offices and the greatest revenues and transactions get done, right, out of those cities, you'll find that this is where population then starts to migrate to, okay? So you've got employment in Melbourne and Sydney, and then you've got population moving into those cities, okay? So once they get to those cities, guess what? They need accommodation. Okay, they need a place to live, a roof over their head, and hence you start to have the true factors that actually drive the property market. Okay, now not necessarily the investment market as such. Okay, but when you're moving into when you're in those two cities and you've you've established yourself in those two cities, then you start to look at some micro levels or some micro factors. Okay, so if you look at Melbourne and Sydney as the two cities to invest in, then you want to start looking at micro factors such as existing infrastructure, right, and planned infrastructure. So if I look at the best place to invest in, let's take Melbourne, right, my hometown. Go and if you want to invest in the best suburb, in the best place in Melbourne, right? Here's the golden rule, okay? Find the city and the water, and have a look at the properties that sit equal distance between the city and the water, okay? Preferably you'd like the city to be on the water, okay? And look at real estate that actually surrounds the city and the water. So in Melbourne, I'm talking about suburbs like Port Melbourne, Middle Park, South Melbourne, Albert Park, St Kilda West, St Kilda, areas that have got that are close to the city and close to the water. because as Australians and as beings, actually, we have such an affinity with city living and being very, very close to water, no matter where you are in the world, okay? Now, the problem with this approach is that a lot of real estate in that particular area is quite expensive, okay? You're looking at, you're looking at even unrenovated double-fronted Victorians in those places are like $2 million, okay? So the reality is that not a lot of Australians can either afford to buy there to live or to invest, okay? So what do you do if you can't afford in those areas, okay? You then start to branch out as close to those areas as you can, so staying as close to those areas as possible, okay? I mean, take an example. Middle Park, I think, is the most in-demand suburb in Australia right now as of today. And then you've got areas in New South Wales there around the city, and I think areas like Mossman and Double Bay. You know, that's where predominantly all your good real estate is, because that real estate there, one, it always has a huge demand, right? And two, it's very, very tightly held, okay? And it's got all the amenities that we need. So what I spoke about before, right? You're close to the city, so your employment's covered, right? You've got existing infrastructure, okay? So you've got trains, buses, trams, and you're so close that sometimes you don't even need those things. Then you've got all your amenities, right? Especially the cafe strip, schools, entertainment, education, health, retail, and then you've got the water as well. So if you can afford to buy in those areas there, that's what we call blue chip, bulletproof real estate, okay? As close to the city and the water as you can actually get, okay? So that's where I'd be buying if you could afford to buy, okay? The reality is that not everybody can. So what we then look for is go for areas then that have got existing infrastructure or planned infrastructure, okay? We have a lot of our, and it's got nothing to actually do, by the way, with apartments and units and townhouses and houses. Because whilst there's a lot of commentary out there that will tell you stay away from apartments and stay away from units because of land ratio and you know, land is what grows in value and so forth, I can only give you my experience, okay, with my own portfolio and the portfolio of our clients. And I'm here to tell you that apartments have done well, units have done well, townhouses have done well, houses have done well, okay? So I haven't seen the criteria that a lot of people talk about where they'll stay, that, you know, they'll choose particular type of dwellings, okay? Because the way that we buy, the way consumers are actually buying now and the way that we live is actually changing, okay? And people, the number one criteria right now for people is conveniency. So when you're renting out real estate or selling real estate, you want to make sure that, you know, or buying real estate, you want to make sure that you're buying somewhere where you have all your conveniences really close by, okay? Because it does hurt. Just look at Melbourne and Sydney, right? One of the great things about employment and population is that we're getting a lot of people moving into Melbourne, right? More so than ever right now. And our roads and our infrastructure is becoming strained. I mean, you know, you go down a road like Punt Road, right, which is a major road here in the middle of Melbourne, and even on a Sunday afternoon, right, the road is jam-packed, okay? So forget about it being a working day or work, you know, it's even on weekends now, our roads are starting to become jam-packed. So our governments, whilst their initiatives are good, especially in Melbourne and Sydney, to put a lot of its funding and budget into infrastructure, it's just not keeping up with the amount of people moving in, okay? And I'll tell you one thing too, irrespective of what you hear with regards to the government, the amount of people migrating into Melbourne is not going to stop anytime soon, okay? I won't get into that discussion. I can open that up for another episode of Ask Anthony, but so make sure that that you're buying where you offer conveniency, right, to tenants if you're going to rent the property out, or for yourself if you're going to live there, okay? Because that's becoming the number one thing right now that people want more than anything, especially if you're having to commute to work using your car. But so look at existing infrastructure and look at planned infrastructure, okay? Because once you've established that Melbourne and Sydney are the cities that you need to buy in, you want to make sure that you've got really good infrastructure around you. So once you've determined where those areas are, then you can start to even drill down right down to the street and aspect and type of housing and orientation and so forth, okay? And that requires a lot more research, a lot more skill, a lot more knowledge. You can actually, there's amazing streets that you can buy into. I can tell you some of the best streets in St Kilda where I wouldn't buy. There's only 4 streets in St Kilda that I actually buy, or St Kilda West, that I'd actually buy in, okay? But I don't know for a lot of people if they want to go down to that level of detail. But if you want to really just pinpoint the best, the most astute way of buying real estate, you go right down to the street level, okay? But employment, population, existing infrastructure and planned infrastructure. Make sure that any buying decision you make from an investment perspective has those 4 factors, okay? And then you want to drill down a little bit more deeper than that to get what I would call really good real estate, okay? In summarising, stick to Melbourne and Sydney if you're looking to make money in real estate. While cities like Brisbane and Adelaide and Perth are beautiful parts of Australia, they're more lifestyle cities, okay? The weather's great, but if you have a look at those cities over a long period of time, their performance hasn't been great when it comes to making money. They fall severely behind cities like Melbourne and Sydney, purely based on the factors that I spoke about earlier on, being employment and population, okay? So you're becoming more of a speculator if you start to head into areas like Adelaide, Perth, and Brisbane and Darwin and so for Canberra, Hobart, right? Hobart right now is doing amazing things, right? But the reality is that it's not going to be for a long period of time, and you're already too late if you're planning to make money in Hobart right now, okay? Because if you're finding out about Hobart through me, you're already too late, okay? That's the point I'm trying to make, okay? You become a speculator because you're looking to pick the bottom of the market and the top of the market to get out, bottom of the market to get in. Very few people get that right, and it's actually quite dangerous, okay, if you don't know what you're doing. So stick to Melbourne and Sydney. Both cities have got, amazing track records of performing, well over the last 60 years and even longer. Okay, and then once you've got those macro factors in place, start to look at the micro factors, okay? Existing infrastructure, planned infrastructure, and so forth, all right? So, that out of the way, thank you so much for enjoying another episode of Ask Anthony. We really appreciate your feedback, your questions, your engagement. Give us a call on 1300 793 877 if we can assist you with your investment journey, because you know what, we've done it for close to 12,000 clients who are doing extremely well financially, or go to our website wealthforlife.com.au. We'll talk to you soon.